Welcome to episode 5 of A Friend on the Line. This is your host, ʀᴏᴏᴏ. I go by Lay. And today we have another episode on dream interpretation. If you've been tuning in for the past 2 radio episodes, we've started with a guide on how to interpret your dreams, and we've also had a few special guests who have shared their dreams on air. Tonight we have another guest. We are very privileged to have a good friend of mine, Nat, come on air and share her dream. Actually, she'll be sharing a couple dreams with us. The first one has to do with airport meetings, and we'll be going into travel and again why certain people show up in our dreams and what they're trying to communicate to us through our subconscious symbols and all of that while we're sleeping. And then for the second part of the episode, after a brief music break, we'll be going into a dream that has to do with kind of the metaphysics of how souls travel and how souls can feel about spirit travel and what the spirit realm is like. So that one's going to be really interesting. So if you stay tuned until that part of tonight's episode, you will be in for a treat, definitely. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome my guest, Natalie, to the show. So Natalie, if you'd like to say hi, if you want to add any further introduction, but otherwise you can start with your dream.
Hi, Lee. Thank you so much. I guess I would like to just take a second to honor you because this has been awesome listening to all your episodes and the dedication that you put into this. It's really awesome. So thank you for having me on the show. The first part of this dream, which actually I remember so well because of the last episode that you shared, basically how to tune into your dreams a little bit more. I asked the day after that last episode ran, I was in a place of okay, well, what does the spirit world want me to work on, or what are the messages? And I had a full night of sleep, and the first thing that I remember were purple hues and pinks in the atmosphere. I felt like I was in an airport, I was traveling out of the country, and I was connecting to another flight. I felt like I was going far, to Europe or something like that, and I needed some rest. And so I remember it was dark outside, but in this space that I was in, even though it was a public space an airport, I still felt like I was in somebody's room because of the atmosphere and the lighting. It felt very intimate, almost like someone's room. And there were neon lights and TV screens, and there was somebody that was sitting on what felt like a couch, but they were taking up a lot of space, and they were just really closed off. They were trying to rest, and I was trying to rest as well. And I recognized this person as someone that I've never met in person, but someone that I have interacted a couple of times on the internet. And he just seemed really closed off. Perhaps he didn't want to engage with me. I tried to suggest if he could move over so that I could sit down, because I was a layover, and he just was not moving, and I wasn't leaving, which I thought was really interesting, that I just did not leave that area. And so finally he moved over and he let me sit down, and I remember I sat down. I was really tired, and then he had a blanket on, so he shared his blanket with me, and I started to finally rest. And as I was closing my eyes, he turned to me. So he was on my left side, and he turned, and as I was closing my eyes, dozing off to sleep, he turned and he kissed me on my cheek, on my left cheek. And like as soon as I felt that, I was like awakened again, and I was like, what time is it? And I got up and I got my things and I left, I guess, to my like connecting flight.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for sharing. So we're going to break that down piece by piece, and we're going to start with the setting. So for those of you who are maybe just jumping in, Nat just described a dream where she's at an airport and the atmosphere is filled with purple hues and hints of pink. So starting off with time of day, if you're seeing purple hues, I mean, you generally think that's dusk and that's evening, and with the colors of purple and pink. So what I'm getting is it's sort of like a twilight period. And times of day or times of night really do matter in a dream because they represent something in terms of a personal phase that we're going through. So if the dream starts out at maybe the beginning of the day, or it's bright out, it's maybe a new beginning in your life, or there is a period of your life where you're dealing with something consciously. But if it's nighttime, then you're sort of entering probably a more introspective period. It could be a period of greater solitude and reflection. So with this dream happening at around twilight with hints of purple and pink, so it's sort of like a sunset phase. It's kind of beyond that. There's something coming to a close in Natalie's life, and what her subconscious is doing in the dream is sort of processing this sort of again, like personal transformation that she seems to be going through. And with the colors of purple and pink, so purple has a lot to do, I'm getting the feeling with the pink as well of the heart chakra, and I'm also getting the feeling of the tarot card, the High Priestess, and of purple having a lot to do with our third eye and just our connection to our higher self. So Natalie is really connecting to her intuition and really connecting to her spiritual side of self as well as to her heart. And I feel that this dream has a lot to do with emotional needs that may or may not have been met at this time. Again, Natalie did mention that this happened maybe sometime last month after the dream interpretation episode I did. I think you said it was the first one. So again, like going off with this purple and pink, colors are really important. Pay attention when you're dreaming to the colors of the walls, to what the sky looks like, any detail that you can remember. It generally ends up being important, and it really adds to the overall atmosphere and meaning of the dream. So moving over to the actual physical location and the setting of where Natalie was in the dream. So Nat was at an airport, and so this is a very common dream setting where being at the airport and having any airplane involved in the dream, it represents a really big personal change or transformation that's going to come, because obviously when you take an airplane somewhere, you're going somewhere far. It's a long distance trip. This isn't like a little, A to B. It's like you're potentially going cross country. And again, with Nat saying that she was potentially going to Europe, that is like a whole different continent from where Natalie is in real life. So it signifies something really major for her, a sort of departure of where she is at this period of her life. And again, for this summer, and I'm feeling a lot of this, has to do with being in quarantine and just different personal things that are just coming up for Natalie. There's a lot of reflection that I can feel that on an intuitive level for Nat. So what we have now is sort of a sunset period. Natalie is potentially embarking on a new phase of her life, and her subconscious is processing that. Now, moving into what Nat shared with there being a small room that feels like someone's bedroom. So already, I think I can't remember if we did mention this in a previous episode, but when a bedroom comes up, that's a place of it's just really personal. It's very private. There's potentially like a lot of intimacy there. That's a person's most sacred space usually. And so with this being in the airport, there's something here that Natalie is processing before, maybe she feels ready to embark on this new stage of her life. So with this being a bedroom and the kind of person that's coming up here. So I'm going to go back and forth between a couple different things on this portion of the dream. So I think what I'm going to hit on first is maybe, Nat, if we can talk about this person maybe a little bit more and just kind of like a little bit how you think of them, or at least like, I think you mentioned that you don't really have a strong connection. They're not one of your close friends in real life. I think you said you haven't met, but just with there being a bedroom and like with the kissing on the cheek, I just want to clarify and confirm that, have you ever been like attracted to this person, or, like had any feelings? It's okay if they're not serious, but it is important to sort of decode the dream and what it signals in terms of how you're processing intimacy.
Sure. Yeah, I think they have a pretty like visible like social media presence, and I've followed their work for a couple of years. So at first I've definitely like felt like, oh, like this guy's cute, he's very charismatic and this and that. And like since then, like following his work and the work of his colleagues, like sort of just like having this like, oh, like this esteem towards him. And I do remember that after I had the dream, because I was very confused, like why him? Like I don't really even know him. And I remember that the last time that I interacted with him was on Facebook. Because he had just come out with like having like had COVID, and he was sharing about his experience, and I made a comment, and basically said like, as someone that has lost like people in my life due to this, like I'm really grateful that you're still that you're here, that you're okay. And I remember that was the last engaging that like I did with him. But I definitely have like this like esteem, kind of like a big brother kind of a feeling towards him now. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, a couple different things came up for me intuitively just now while you were talking. I do feel like his appearance in the dream is sort of reflecting two different things for you, two different areas of your life. I feel like one is actually career, reputation, and work, and the other one does have to do with maybe like romance and intimacy. And I think, what you mentioned at the end, it's like, it's definitely important because you don't necessarily feel close to them now, but it's just sort of like he's a stand-in for someone that you maybe felt attracted to. But I think you mentioned earlier that you felt that this person was closed off in the dream, right? Like, I mean, they were affectionate towards you at the end, but you said you said that he was emotionally closed off, right?
Yes, okay. Very emotionally unavailable. He was like not trying to associate himself with me, like at all.
Okay, great. I mean, not great that he was doing that, but great that we have that detail.
Okay.
So, touching off that, I do want to connect that to what the room is like in the dream, and then I'm going to connect that to what you just said about this person and kind of what happened with them in the dream. So you mentioned his bedroom, and we covered that a bedroom is a really personal, intimate space, potentially, right? But the way that Nat described the dream is really interesting because there are neon lights in the room, there's a mini fridge and TV screens. So for me, the feeling that I got when Nat shared that, it reminds me kind of a lot of a bar, and with a mini fridge. It's not a big fridge. So when you think about how you're going to be nourished and what the level of commitment is to a space, when you have a mini fridge, it's like you might not be in that space for long. It might be a place where you go in and out. It's not as nurturing as in a kitchen and you have a huge fridge with a lot of food. So if you relate food to sustenance and how this person, if you pay attention to how this person was kind of cold to Natalie is in a space where she's not really able to get nourished in different ways. And that's also why the mini fridge was there. That was my feeling about that. You have to pay attention to these little symbols and things that show up. Again, like a mini fridge, you might think nothing of it, but when you think about it, there's a whole feeling to a mini fridge. And then there's a neon sign in there. It reminds me of a bar, where a bar is really about casual encounters. It's a little bit more superficial. There's not really just is not a lot of depth to a bar usually. You know what I mean? The way that we think of bars is typically like you go out, you have fun, you hang out, but it's not necessarily where you're gonna make a deep connection, not generally. These things really come together into the dream and just really communicate how Natalie's processing this emotional availability from this person, and or the lack thereof. So I feel like what I mentioned earlier with this person reflecting a couple different things to Natalie. One thing is the work, career, reputation, and because this person represents someone who is pretty successful or someone who is pretty prolific and who has like a social media presence. I believe Natalie mentioned that earlier. Natalie, like this person not being super available to Natalie, I think that Natalie is really processing how those aspects of her life don't seem to be as accessible or in abundance as maybe she would like them to be. It feels like this person is, she looks at them as a big brother. She mentioned that earlier when she talks about how she feels about this person now as opposed to her initial feelings of attraction. It feels like Natalie's subconscious self is really processing the fact that, she wants to be maybe at a level where this person is, but because, this person's kind of distant from her, it kind of represents those markers of success, not being there for Natalie at this present moment, and just her dream is really showing her where she wants to be. Kind of reflects her ambition and maybe her feelings of lack in regard to her own personal projects, because Nat actually is an artist. And moving on from that, with emotional intimacy, it feels like we had that first aspect of work and career opportunities coming up. This person is also, I feel like they're showing, I'm getting different words come to mind as I'm tapping it intuitively, but I'm getting pride and emotional connection. So it just feels like there's something about this person where they're aloof and Natalie wants something more. It feels like Natalie's subconscious is kind of grappling with an absence in her life. It feels like maybe on a deeper level, Natalie isn't sort of satisfied with maybe the emotional connections that she's making, particularly on a romantic level. So again, if you're seeing someone come up in your dream, this came up last episode as well, where, our previous guest, Jinro, similar situation, someone that Jinro knew on Instagram showed up in the dream. And again, like in both of these situations, like they're showing, it's someone that the dreamer had sort of an attraction to, doesn't really know very well, and the person kind of comes up just to kind of like reflect those feelings, or just they're kind of a stand-in for those different emotions and that kind of romantic attraction. It's not necessarily about the person themselves. It doesn't mean like you have a strong connection with that person in real life and that's what you're processing. It's more so, again, that stand-in of maybe someone you don't know very well, but someone that you might fantasize about. That's often the significance of when kind of random people come up in our dreams, maybe people that we think are cute but we don't really think about in real life. And it's often because they're showing us something about how we feel about our romantic lives on a deeper level. So, all of this, Natalie's grappling with it in the dream right before she is supposed to go to her flight, and she's kind of like distracted, and she, finally what happened, she sat down, and then Natalie, he shared his blanket with you, right? And then right when you're dozing off to sleep, he kissed you on the cheek, right? But it's just on the cheek, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, and then you woke up and you had to leave, and so you hurried up and left. So yeah, there's this whole thing about, it's like, it feels like Natalie's soul is ready to kind of embark on a new beginning, but it sort of feels like a, one last thing. Like I get that image of like Steve Jobs when he's like, wait, like let's process a couple more things, because it just feels like your soul wants to process these things that you feel like are lacking in your life before you feel like you're ready to embrace this next chapter the fullest way possible. So I'm trying to think of if there's anything else that I wanted to mention. Natalie, do you feel like there are any questions that you have for me? Maybe anything in the dream that you would like addressed more before I potentially tune in intuitively maybe, and then let you know if there's any heads up that Spirit wants to give you about the next period of your life?
I think I'm good with the dream interpretation. It makes a lot of sense.
Okay, perfect. So I am definitely open to relaying any messages that Spirit has for you in regards to this transition that you're making, and maybe the next part of your life, if you're open to that. So you can let me know, otherwise we don't have to do it, and we can switch over to the music break and we can go to the second part of the episode. Just let me know.
I think we can do it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so yeah, what I'm getting right now is I'm just seeing a picture of a lion, and I'm seeing the image of the Three of Wands tarot card, and I'm also getting the Death card, and I'm seeing sort of a purple like mist, and it's sort of like a dusky twilight moving through. It sort of looks like a swamp or a marsh, but the grass is pretty low, and it's really flat and wide. There's a lot of visibility. So I just mentioned a few different things, and so to break that down, starting with the line, there's a sense of personal pride. I feel like there's a lot of accomplishment in terms of how far you've gotten to this at this point, and maybe a sense of self-confidence, and again, pride in your achievements and all the things that you've been working on. But again, I feel some sort of sense of regret, and it's sort of like grappling with the things that you've left behind or maybe didn't feel satisfied with, different situations that maybe didn't have a resolution. I feel like your soul is kind of moving forward and trying to let go of these things. And again, that's why you were dreaming about these different things in the dream. So it's like, there's that paradox. You're happy with where you are, but you also feel like you want to go further. So that was why that ambition showed up with this person that you feel like is a little bit ahead of you. And that was what he signified in the dream. So, going back to the visions that I was seeing, Three of Wands and Death, it feels like you've already committed to moving forward. It feels like you have kind of a rough idea of where you're moving at this point in your life. And the Death card is really about continuing with this momentous change that you're going through. And it's like a lapse sort of like of the old self. I feel just like shedding and just different shifts in your environment. That's kind of why I saw the mist and the fog. So it's sort of like there's some, emotional undercurrents there, but because everything was so flat and you had such great visibility, based on what I see intuitively, it feels like you're very aware, very conscious, in a general sense of kind of what's going on, of where you're situated in your life and in your personal world. So I feel like Spirit is commending you for that. I don't know, I feel like I see someone like eating popcorn. It may be one of your guides or some of your spirit guides, but I feel like they're very excited. So they're almost like, I don't know if it's like they're entertained or like they're feeling joy because they're excited to see where you're about to go next. I do feel like things are opening up for you. I can just sort of feel those shifts. I feel something beneath the earth as well, just something kind of like moving. So it feels like there's going to be a foundational shift for you. There's going to be a lot of big things happening. I feel like especially in 2021, and you're going to feel those sort of like residual effects like moving through into 2022, but a lot of it is going to happen next year. Natalie. So if if you have any questions on that.
You said the last part, you said the swamp or marsh.
The what? Sorry.
A swamp or like a marsh.
Yeah, so it's a swamp or a marsh. So usually with a swamp or a marsh, like it's important because there's water. Yeah, thanks for asking me to clarify, because sometimes I assume that people know what I'm talking about, or I kind of get caught up in my visions because, I'm familiar with what swamps mean. But usually swamps or marshes, it's like kind of clogged water, or it's like it's just not as clear, and it just has to do with like emotions and our emotional landscape. But again, because I don't feel like it's that bad, because here it's so low, it feels pretty shallow. So and there's some mist kind of floating around you, and just it's very flat. But again, it's like I sort of feel a little bit of emotional, maybe uneasiness or unrest, or maybe a little bit of ambiguity, but it feels so minimal, again, because it's flat and it's kind of like around your ankles. Your feet aren't really that deep into the water. It feels like you have just a pretty good grasp of like where you're going. It doesn't feel like you're so mired in, emotional confusion, or, just situations that aren't very clear, again, which is what a swamp can sometimes represent. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Do you have any other questions on the messages that I just shared?
I think I'm good.
Okay,
Thank
perfect. You. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so with that being said, we are going to break with a couple songs, and then we are going to come back and we're going to delve into part 2 of the episode, and Natalie is going to share a different dream that I believe she had the same night as in this first part. So just stay tuned. We're going to play a couple songs and we'll be right back after the break. Okay, and we are now back with part 2 of tonight's episode. And Natalie will be back with us to share another part of her dream. It's sort of like a different dream, but from the same night as the first dream that she just shared in part 1 of the episode. So Natalie, if you want to confirm that and then maybe share the dream, and then we will get into this portion where we're going to talk about some really interesting spiritual metaphysics, and we're going to look a little bit into how the spirit realm works and what that experience is like for, different souls. So Natalie?
Yes. Yeah, so this was definitely different. I could feel the difference just in the kind of like the day and the colors, like the colors white and like yellow from the sunlight really like set that apart from the first part for me. So I was in this place. I felt like it was Europe. It felt very like, kind of like European looking. So I don't know where it was. But I remember going into like something like a lecture hall or like a church or a synagogue. And there was a lot of people. It was like a conference, but it felt like it was very intentional, like for like this one big meeting or something like that. So I remember going in and everybody's like really like dressed up and stuff like that. And we're in this room and everything is like white. Like all the pillars are white. It felt like this like lecture hall where like all the tables and like the desks and everything was white. And there were like hundreds of people there from like all over the world. And there was somebody at the front of the space that was like had like a whiteboard, and she was asking folks to say like what church they were coming from. And so she was writing them down in like small columns, going from left to right. And I remember like when she called me and asked me like, where are you coming from? I told her the church where I was coming from, and she just wrote down Newport Beach and then like kept going to the next person. And I remember just feeling like, that's not right. Like that's not it. But I didn't tell her anything. Like I didn't speak up. And then that was over. We talked amongst ourselves, and then someone came in. It felt like it was like a tall, like older white man, like all white suit, that was like going around the aisles, and sort of like preaching, kind of giving like a lecture. But he would like pop in and out like through the aisles and stuff like that, and then he would kind of direct folks like from the front of the room, but he was like kind of like moving in and out through the aisles, and everybody was just like laughing and like, just kind of, he just seemed very charismatic, and like people really adored him. And I was just like, okay, cool. But like I felt more like observant and willing, but not as enthusiastic as other people. And then we had time to like discuss, like as a council. It felt kind of serious. Like that was the reason why I was traveling.
Wait, can you repeat the last part again? Sorry.
Oh, it felt like a serious kind of matter that we were discussing, and that was the reason for why I was traveling.
Okay, got it. Great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Natalie. So yeah, this is definitely a much different feeling from the first dream. And right away, we talked about how colors are important. And in this dream, Natalie is somewhere where there's a lot of white, there's a lot of clarity, there's a lot of yellow sunlight coming in from the windows, and it's clear skies outside. So when Natalie was talking about this dream again right now during the episode, I just like got such a strong feeling of Summerland. It was almost like shouting, intuitively for me. And for those of you who aren't aware of this term, like I don't know that I actually use this term that often, but it's one that I'm familiar with, and it kind of refers to like the the other side, or like the spiritual realm, just basically what exists aside from like this physical reality that we currently occupy. Maybe some people call it heaven, but it's a little bit more intricate and multi-layered, more so than that heaven that we often conceptualize, of it being all sunshine and rainbows. But it is a place that is really divine, and there are different realms even within Summerland. I feel like that's kind of what I'm getting. There's just sort of like, it's a realm, but there's like a different intricacies to it, and it's like all part of the same thing. So this may sound really abstract, or it sounds kind of like really a bit more out there maybe than the stuff that I usually talk about, but I decided to go ahead with this because I do think it's really interesting. It speaks to the different levels of information and different memories that our souls can process, even in our physical incarnations, while we're dreaming. So a lot of this, I felt, when Natalie originally went through this dream with me, I felt that it did have to do with that. It had to do with kind of her soul recollection and her memory of the process of going through Summerland. Especially the feeling I'm getting now is of her transitioning through that space, because again, for a lot of souls, especially when they transition out of their physical incarnation, they kind of have to go through this whole, it's like a debriefing process, or they just kind of go through Summerland. And I will share that there's different levels of like experience that go into navigating the spirit world and the spirit realm. And I have been a little bit hesitant to talk about it. This isn't something that I've looked into a lot, consciously at least, and like in this lifetime, but I was definitely getting a lot of strong feelings about it when Natalie ran through this with me, and I sort of like channeled more information about it. So on some level, it's like, to talk about the philosophy and sort of like how spirit works, and why we have souls and all of that. If we're going to look at things from that level and that perspective, souls are really different manifestations of the divine, and in these particular forms, we're intended to hopefully evolve in a spiritual level. So there's going to be different souls with different levels of experience. So hopefully that's not too abstract or too contentious of a way to look at things, but that's a lot of what is going to play into how we look at Natalie's dream, because this dream is kind of bringing up those feelings for her. So, I mentioned that this has a lot to do with Summerland, of like the spirit realm. And so Natalie's in a lecture hall, and, it feels like a church or a synagogue when she walks in. So again, it's pointing out to the spiritual nature of this place. And with it being a lecture hall, and there being tall white desks and people coming back and forth, and there's someone at the front of the room and she's writing, there's a lot of logistics involved. As you can tell, there's a lot of coming and going. There is some sense of organization. So I feel like part of the reason this is coming up and why I'm channeling this on the show is to really show, different levels of Summerland, and maybe this idea of heaven, it sort of complicating that notion that we have, because it's not really so cut and dry. What I'm getting from this is that the spirit realm is actually pretty organized, and there are different levels. There are those different intricacies that I mentioned earlier. So, I'm, especially from like my political perspective, my personal perspective of how I am now, it's like I really don't like to talk about things in terms of hierarchy, but there just sort of is that facet of the spirit world, not necessarily in a negative way. It just really speaks to different souls being at different levels of experience and wisdom, especially if you go into, there being enlightened souls like the Buddha and different, religious figures that we're familiar with. So if you can think about that, it's like not everybody is maybe at that level at a particular moment of space and time. So there's going to be souls that have yet to kind of go a little bit further in their evolution. And so this is kind of what's coming up for Natalie, like what I felt for her, and maybe what you can what you yourselves can sense from Natalie having shared that dream is Natalie kind of feels like at odds here. Like Natalie was like going up, and she told the person, asking where everybody's coming and going, like she said, that person like misunderstood or just wrote down incorrectly where Natalie's from. So Natalie, would like to invite you to share maybe like what are your personal feelings about Newport Beach, because this person wrote down that that's where you're from, but you knew that that wasn't the right answer, and that you're not actually from Newport Beach.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. That was what she wrote, because I like have a very I don't know how do I feel. I think I have a stereotype of what Newport Beach is, like subconsciously that comes up. Like consciously, I don't want to like have a stereotype of people that are from that city, but like I guess with my experiences and stuff like that, it just seemed like no, we're not from that part of like growing up in Orange County, like we're not from there, like really like distancing myself from there, even though.
Oop. Okay, looks like we had maybe a call issue come up. Let me try calling Natalie again. I do apologize for the technical issue. I think she may have gotten disconnected. So let me try calling her back up.
Sorry.
Okay,
No,
so
no,
Natalie, you're
okay.
back on, so just keep going
Okay.
from where you left off.
Okay, so what was the last thing that you heard me say?
Newport Beach, you said you, being from Orange County, you were really adamant about like emphasizing that you're not from there because you don't like Newport Beach. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what I'm getting.
Yeah, so even though I kind of grew up in proximity, like in close proximity to people that were from there, and like I went to a church like as a teenager where there were people from there, like as I got older, I kind of made a point to like distance myself from that, or from like the stereotypes that comes from being like from that area, I guess. So it just felt very like no, that's definitely not what I would.
What is the stereotype of like Newport Beach? I'm not super familiar with it.
Stereotype? Well, I mean, I guess it's just like a lot of like surfer dudes, a lot of like socioeconomically, like just a lot of rich, like white entitled kids, just like not a lot of accountability. It's very close in proximity to Huntington Beach.
Got it.
And like all the beach cities, and like kind of the way that this, yeah.
Okay. So I feel like the way that you think of it's kind of like a different sort of community, and maybe a lot of them are more privileged than like what you're used to in a certain way coming from Orange County and, you know, being a person of color. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect. So it coming back to the dream, it just feels like Natalie felt super misrepresented when that person wrote that down. It was just totally like the opposite of what Natalie feels like she is. And you know what? It's interesting, like as I'm tuning in now and then Natalie mentioning that, it's sort of like Newport Beach seems like something almost a little bit more elusive, maybe a little bit like higher class maybe, or upper class, and that kind of, you know, in real life not being something that Natalie identifies with, and she kind of cultivated this pride and where she's from in her community. So I actually feel some resistance here, because it's like Newport Beach, it feels like maybe that's more of an affluent area from what you're saying. So it's like when that person wrote that down, you almost feel like you're not at that level, not necessarily like, you know, politically, like that's not necessarily bad, like, you know, if you're looking at things in a more mundane way, but it feels like spiritually, spirit is trying to say like you're a little bit maybe further than where you're at, but it feels like, you know, they're kind of coaxing you, trying to open your horizons, or, you know, get you to be more open to new and different things, and sort of expanding. And it feels like your soul is a little bit uncomfortable with that and kind of wants to stay in your comfort zone. So it's interesting that I didn't really think of that before, but that is just really what came up for me on an intuitive level just now. So again, like if for those of you who maybe just are joining in, Natalie is processing through this dream like different feelings that her soul has had in Summerland, and it is in regards to her spiritual evolution. So again, to recap from earlier, there is a level of organization, there is a level of bureaucracy to Summerland, because it's really geared to help organize souls into maybe different facets of healing. It's really meant to be, it's almost like a big school in a lot of ways, and there's just different areas and there's different techniques to help souls get to the level where they need to be in order to spiritually expand, to, you know, again, to sort of like level up and reach a greater, you know, I guess, phase or transformation, a different level of ascension. So, you know, Natalie here is sort of processing that and feeling sort of at odds. It feels like, you know, something I got in terms of this dream for Natalie was sort of like the phrase Rookie of the Year. And it just feels like Natalie, I'm getting different things come up, sort of like when you say someone's green or they're kind of fresh. Now, Natalie, if it's okay for me to share, Natalie, but that, I've had this sense before of, me knowing you outside of this context of like this radio episode, but, you've had different lifetimes. So it's not like, this is like your first incarnation, but it really feels like you don't have a lot of the breadth and depth of experience with Summerland and maybe like the logistics and how it works in the spiritual realm. So it feels like that's something that you're grappling with here. And it feels like you're almost like reluctant to like move forward with it. And, you and I were talking about this earlier, not on the episode, but just outside of it, but how you feel like spiritual evolution is kind of a big focus for you, especially in this lifetime, and how you want to grow. So it's interesting that this is kind of coming up and all your feelings about Summerland and what it was like for your soul in that realm, and just feeling out of place, and especially seeing like this person in all white. There's something about, these people that just, and maybe these different souls that are maybe a little bit more experienced, that maybe for you feels a little bit off-putting. And again, there may be some resistance from you from kind of joining those ranks and kind of gaining more experience. And I'm seeing it now as like, like a Girl Scout or a Boy Scout or whatever, and kind of gaining your badges. It's like there's part of you that wants to be content with like where you are, but I feel like Spirit is almost like coaxing you to go a little bit further and to kind of stretch your wings a little bit more. So I hope that has made sense so far. I think, Natalie, I'm going to give you a chance to chime in and see, if there's anything that you want to share, maybe about how this resonated with you. This was definitely a very different kind of dream interpretation. I don't usually have this kind of information come up. I do get it. I do get some stuff about soul experiences when I give intuitive readings, but I've not really tried to look in depth into like how Summerland works. But yeah, Natalie, if you have any questions about what I just said, if you want to, bring up any parts of the dream that you feel like I didn't really refer to as much, or that maybe you want me to go into with a little bit more detail.
It definitely makes sense. I definitely feel like that is a message that I needed to hear, especially like at that time. I felt like kind of lost, and that really kind of revived me, like kind of like in my waking life, like wake up, like what do you actually want to do like with your life? Like it was very interesting. I don't think I remember having a dream like that before. So it's great to like, kind of have that dream interpreted and kind of also reflect like where I am in my process. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you for sharing. So this was definitely like a very special, very interesting type of dream. And I think I want to relay, I think if there's anything that maybe like Spirit wants to convey to people listening right now, whether that's like for the live stream with a radio show or later on as a podcast, I feel like Spirit wants to emphasize that all of us have a unique purpose and a unique mission in our lives, and that we all have different paths of growing, healing, and learning. And it's not necessarily bad to be in a certain place, and it's not really for us to compare to where other souls are at. But they also are encouraging us not to sort of resist like this call and this pull to keep forging ahead and to get ever closer to our authentic selves. So again, I want to point out that the hierarchy, this notion of it isn't necessarily a bad thing. There's just different levels of experience. And at the end of the day, it's not a value judgment about how worthy we are, about how more important we are to all that exists. But it's really like we're all in this together. We're just sort of like, if we're going into this idea of like space and time, we're all just at different points and at different levels of evolution. And I will say I do believe that Spirit goes above linear time, but that's sort of like a really heavy topic that maybe I'll go into in a later segment or on some different platform. But Natalie, I want to thank you again for sharing this dream. And if anybody has any questions about how the spirit realm works or about anything that I said, especially for this part of the dream, and maybe if you have questions about like how your soul is evolving or just how you experience things on a spiritual level, you can definitely drop me a message. You can do that with a friend on the line or with my account, ʀᴏᴏᴏ. Actually, yeah, so I want to thank you again, Natalie, and make sure, I know we just covered that you don't have any questions, but did you have any last comment before I continue to wrap this up?
I'm good. Thank you, Lei.
Perfect. Thank you again, Natalie. Okay, yeah. So great. So to keep going with wrapping up the episode, you can find a friend on the line on Instagram. It's just look up a friend on the line and you'll find it. And you can stay up to date with the latest news and when the next episode is going to be and what the episode is going to be on. If any of you have special requests for what you'd like to see, whatever topics you want me to cover on the show, feel free to leave a comment, send me a message. You can also do so on my personal / business account. Again, I go by ʀᴏᴏᴏ. Mahiwaga is, it means magical in Tagalog, because I'm Filipino, and it's just really my account where I talk about spirit, and because I am an intuitive medium, which many people think of as a psychic reader. I do energy healing, I do birth charts, all different kinds of things. So for those of you who are interested in connecting with me, potentially getting a reading, I do offer, specifically dream interpretation services, and I do, other types of work that has to do with helping you kind of get in touch with yourself a little bit better, and it just to help people find greater clarity so they sort of know where they are in life, and know kind of how to direct from this point on, or whatever point that people choose to connect with me if they feel so called. So again, it's an honor and a privilege to have shared space with you all tonight, or again, whatever point in time that you're listening to this recording. I want to thank Natalie again. If any of you are interested in potentially guesting on my show, feel free to hit me up in that regard as well. And again, sending so much love and wishing you all very many blessings, especially for those of you listening in this weird coronavirus pandemic era. But there's a lot of shifts and personal transformation happening, and I'm really wishing those of you who would embrace it, all the healing that you can possibly get, because a lot of us are just in for even more of a weird time, just different things coming up personally, politically, globally. So again, leaving off this episode by sending you all a lot of love, a lot of light, and wishing you all so much clarity. And so to end the broadcast, we're just going to move into one song, and that'll be it for tonight. And again, stay tuned for episode 6.